On my 33rd birthday, my father raised a glass and fired me from the family company. At a cake cutting he called budget-friendly. My stepmother slid an envelope across the table. A check for £0 and a simple note that said, "Grow up." They didn't know the payroll system they weaponized runs on my passwords, and my signature is the one that releases their salaries every other Friday. By the time the candles stopped smoking, I'd already scheduled the transfer that would make the truth hit like a fire alarm. My name is Rowan Pierce, and on the day I turned 33, my family took me to Solace. The restaurant sits on Riverbend in Graybridge, North Alder, a place designed for people who confuse expense with taste. We were in a private room. One wall a seamless sheet of glass that looked out onto the river. Tonight, it wasn't reflecting the placid water. It was mirroring the five of us, turning our staged dinner into a silent, flickering movie of our own lies. In the reflection, the candlelight warped our faces into masks. I was the director of operations at Straight Line Logistics, a title that sounded important but was, in reality, just another gilded cage in the Pierce family's legacy. The company was my father's life, my brother's inheritance, and my prison. Dad, Caleb Pierce, tapped his fork against a crystal water glass. The sound, a delicate, high-pitched chime, cut through the pretense of celebration. He stood, his frame casting a long, wavering shadow against the glass wall. He looked like the marketing photos Marla insisted on. Silver at the temples, a jawline that still suggested strength, a suit tailored to hide the slight paunch of a man who hadn't lifted a heavy box in 2 decades. "A toast," he announced, his voice booming with the artificial warmth he reserved for board meetings and public executions. "To new directions, to the future." My stepmother, Marla, raised her champagne flute, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light. Her mascara was, as always, perfect. She looked at him with an adoring gaze so practiced it could have been copyrighted. My brother, Jesse, who sat opposite me, mirrored the gesture. A flicker of something, anticipation, maybe, in his eyes, before he smoothed it over with a look of bland filial piety. His wife, Bryn, didn't raise her glass. She raised her phone. The small red light of the recording dot a malevolent eye in the dim room. "For the family archive," she'd said earlier, her voice sweet as saccharin. Now, that archive was capturing my professional demise. "As we all know," Dad continued, his eyes sweeping the table but pointedly avoiding mine, "a company like Straight Line must remain agile. We must adapt, evolve, and sometimes we must restructure for optimal efficiency." He said the word restructure like a surgeon announcing a clean, necessary amputation. "Effective immediately, we are streamlining our executive operations. The role of Director of Operations will be absorbed into the broader strategic oversight of the CEO and the head of acquisitions." He meant himself and Jesse. My role was eliminated. I was fired. He sat down to a small, pathetic smatter of applause from Jesse and Bryn. Marla didn't clap. She simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, as if she were reading a eulogy she'd personally edited for maximum impact. Her expression was one of solemn sympathy, the kind of look you give a distant cousin whose dog has died. It was perfect, theatrical, and utterly empty. Jesse, meanwhile, arranged his face into a mask of stunned surprise. He turned to me, his mouth slightly agape. "Rowan, I had no idea. Dad, this is a shock. It was a terrible performance. I could see the lie clinging to him like cheap cologne. I'd seen his search history on the company network last week. Legal requirements for terminating a family employee. The waiter, oblivious, chose that moment to bring the cake. A small, sad-looking chocolate cake with 33 candles crammed onto its surface. As he set it down, Marla slid a thin, cream-colored envelope across the polished mahogany table. It stopped just short of my plate. My name was written on the front in her elegant, soulless calligraphy. "A little something to help you on your new path," she said, her voice a silken murmur. I picked it up. The paper was expensive, heavy. Inside was a check, a company check from Straight Line Logistics. The payee line read, Rowan Pierce. The amount was $0. Tucked behind it was a small, stiff card, her handwriting again. Grow up, Rowan. The punchline landed with the force of a physical blow, a concussive silence that sucked the air out of the room. This wasn't just about the job. This was the full excommunication. I was being cut off from the family trust, severed from the company, erased. They were taking my past and my future in one clean, cruel slice. I looked up from the $0 check. 4 faces watched me, waiting for the explosion, waiting for tears, for shouting, for the messy, satisfying drama they craved. Bryn's phone was still pointed directly at my face. I gave them nothing. I said nothing, because silence is a weapon they don't know how to disarm. Silence is a fuse. My lack of reaction was a void in their carefully constructed scene, and it made them uncomfortable. I could see it in the way Dad cleared his throat, in the way Jesse shifted in his seat. They had written a script where I played the hysterical victim. I refused to say my lines. Instead, I leaned forward, my gaze steady. The waiter, cued by my father, began to light the candles. One by one, tiny flames bloomed in the darkness, their reflections dancing on the glass wall behind my family's heads. They looked like a jury of ghosts. Make a wish, Bryn chirped, zooming in. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of sugar and burning wax, and I blew. All 33 flames vanished in a single gust, a thin gray tendril of smoke rising from each blackened wick. I made a wish, but it wasn't a wish at all. It was a sequence of steps, a protocol, a plan I had built for a day just like this one. As they began their hollow, off-key rendition of Happy Birthday, my right hand slipped beneath the table. My fingers found the cool, smooth surface of my phone. I didn't need to look. My thumb swiped once, then tapped the screen twice in a precise, practiced pattern. A small, almost imperceptible vibration answered against my palm. Confirmed. Contingency quiet hours was now active. It was a kill switch I'd embedded deep in the company's digital infrastructure 6 months ago. A silent alarm system disguised as a server load balancing protocol. It was designed for emergencies, a hostile takeover, a catastrophic system failure, or a birthday party ambush. It would freeze all non-essential executive financial approvals and flag any anomalous disbursement requests for manual review. A manual review that could only be conducted by one person, me. The song ended. The applause was as thin as the smoke still rising from the candles. The waiter returned, holding a silver tray laden with miniature desserts, tiramisu in tiny glasses, creme brulee in small white ramekins, chocolate lava cakes oozing their molten cores. He offered the tray to Marla first. She smiled, selecting a creme brulee, blissfully unaware. They all were. They looked at the dessert tray, seeing only sugar and cream and victory. They thought they had won. They thought they had cut me off. They had no idea that they were the ones about to be severed. The dessert tray had arrived, and so had the end of their paid illusions. Marla cracked the caramelized sugar on her creme brulee with a delicate tap of her spoon. The sharp sound echoed the crack in our family's foundation. The Pierces of Straight Line Logistics. Love a good slogan. Our trucks are emblazoned with it. Our website splashes it in a bold, confident font. We move the world. It's a lie. Of course. A perfect, press release ready lie. We move freight. Pallets of consumer goods and industrial parts. We don't move the world. In this family, we barely move each other. We orbit, locked in a cold, predictable pattern by the gravity of my father's ambition and the company he built. I remember when Straight Line was just one warehouse behind a bowling alley, the air thick with the smell of diesel, damp cardboard, and my father's sweat. Caleb Pierce wasn't a CEO then. He was a man with a leased forklift and a second mortgage. My childhood nights weren't filled with bedtime stories, but with the rhythmic beeping of trucks backing into loading bays, I grew up counting pallets, not sheep, learning the difference between a bill of lading and an invoice before I learned long division. My mother was there then, Her name was Eleanor, and she brought thermoses of coffee at 3 a.m. and kept the books on a folding table in a corner that always smelled faintly of motor oil. She believed in him. She believed the work meant something. After she died, the grit and honesty of that warehouse died too. Marla arrived a year later, not with a thermos of coffee, but with a branding consultant. She didn't see a logistics company. She saw a lifestyle brand waiting to be born. She scrubbed the story clean, replacing the dusty warehouse with a narrative of bootstrap genius. The coffee stains and forklift grease were painted over with corporate blue and a relentless need for staged perfection. She introduced the slogans, the mission statements, the annual Pierce Family Values Retreat in Aspen that was just an excuse for Instagram photos. The company, like our family, became an exercise in image management. Across the table, my brother Jesse swirled the last of the wine in his glass. Jesse, the heir apparent. He collects job titles the way other men his age collect sneakers. He's been vice president of strategic growth, chief innovation officer, and now head of acquisitions. None of these titles require him to be at the office before 10 a.m. or to know how to read a fuel surcharge index. He's never finished a shift report in his life. I remember one Friday night, 3 years ago. A critical shipment for an automotive plant was held up in customs due to a paperwork error he'd made. His solution was to turn off his phone and take Bryn to a concert. I spent 36 hours straight on the phone with freight forwarders and customs brokers in 2 different time zones, sleeping on the floor of my office to get that line moving again. When Dad came in on Monday, he saw the completed paperwork on his desk and clapped Jesse on the shoulder. "Good initiative, son." Jesse just smiled, not even having the decency to look guilty. While he was collecting titles, I was earning shifts. I started on the night crew, loading trucks in the freezing cold. Then the morning shift, processing orders until my eyes burned from staring at a screen. Then I got the mess in between. The broken pallets, the angry clients, the dispatchers who quit without notice. Every rung of the ladder I climbed was greasy and left splinters in my hands. So when they announced my promotion to Director of Operations 2 years ago, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. It died quickly. The promotion came with a new office, one with a glass wall facing the main operations floor, and a state-of-the-art security camera pointed directly at my desk. It wasn't a promotion. It was a panopticon. I had the responsibility for every single thing that went wrong, but my authority was a ghost. Every significant decision had to be socialized with Dad and Jesse, which was code for them taking credit if it worked and blaming me if it failed. The cameras weren't for security. They were to make sure I never stepped out of line. The ultimate leash, however, has always been the Pierce family trust. The document was dangled over our heads from the moment we could understand what a stock portfolio was. It wasn't a gift. It was a contract. A contract filled with vague, menacing clauses Marla had her lawyers draft. There were the behavioral clauses, which could be interpreted to mean anything from a DUI to a public argument. There was the public conduct clause, a catch-all for embarrassing the family brand. My favorite was the marital optics clause, which stipulated that any spouse had to be of a certain social and economic standing, subject to a background check and, essentially, Marla's approval. The trust was a gilded cage, and they rattled the bars anytime I pushed back. Whenever I questioned Jesse's expense reports or flagged an invoice from one of Marla's ridiculously overpriced consultants, I was summoned for a family meeting. The verdict was always the same. I was too intense. I was not a team player. I was creating a hostile work environment. These were all code words. Of course, what they really meant was that I was the one who keeps the books straight. I was the one who cared enough to notice the cracks in their perfect facade. I saw the hairline fractures in the press release they called a family, and I had the audacity to point them out. So they decided I was the problem. Not the cracks themselves, but the one who saw them. In the main conference room at Straight Line headquarters, there's a wall of professionally framed family photos. There's Dad shaking the governor's hand. There's Marla at a charity gala. There's Jesse and Bryn on their sailboat. And then there's my photo. A corporate headshot where the photographer told me to try to look a little warmer in the lineup on the wall. My picture is always a little out of level. Every few weeks, I straighten it. By the next board meeting, it's crooked again. It used to bother me. Now I see it for the perfect, unintentional metaphor that it is. I was the one who never quite fit their frame. I looked at them now, picking at their expensive desserts under the warm, forgiving lights of the restaurant. They were all smiling, playing their parts: the loving father, the supportive stepmother, the concerned brother, a perfect family portrait for Bryn's phone. Everyone smiles on cue, but I've seen them when the cameras are off, when the quarterly reports are due, when the numbers don't add up. The smiles get tight, then they vanish. They are at their most real, their most honest, on the second and fourth Thursday of every month, the day before payroll, the day they have to come to me to make sure the money will be there. They just forgot that today is Thursday, and payroll is tomorrow. They see a woman who has just been fired, a daughter cast out. What they don't see is the architect. They sit in a building they believe they own, without ever realizing that I designed the load-bearing walls, the electrical grid, and every single lock on every single door. The foundation of their power was poured 6 months ago, and they were too busy to attend the ceremony. It started when our CFO, a man named Arthur Fleming, quit spectacularly in the middle of our annual audit. He walked into my father's office, dropped a stack of files on his desk, said something about creative accounting and not going to prison for this family, and was gone before security could be called. It sent Caleb and Jesse into a blind panic. The auditors were in the building, and the only person with top-level signatory authority for disbursements was gone. The company's financial bloodstream was about to clot. Naturally, they turned to me. I was the only one who actually knew where all the bodies were buried because I was the one who had to dig the graves. I spent the next 72 hours placating the audit firm and rebuilding the ledgers Arthur had intentionally corrupted on his way out. At the end of it, exhausted and running on fumes, I was named interim signatory on all corporate accounts. My father called it a temporary field promotion. It was the biggest mistake he ever made. Our bank, Piermont Trust and Financial, is old money and obsessively cautious. Their corporate banking covenants are carved in stone, and the most important one is the requirement for dual authorization on any significant disbursement. One signature from a straight-line executive and a countersignature from a designated financial controller. For years, that was my father and Arthur. With Arthur gone, a new workflow was needed. The second signature on our largest and most important batches, payroll, came from our third-party payroll vendor. The vendor was a company called Piermont Services. Here is the beautiful, simple, devastating detail they never bothered to learn. Piermont Services isn't a true third-party vendor. It's a captive entity. A shell company my father set up a decade ago on the advice of a tax lawyer to streamline payroll processing and create a liability shield. It has no physical office. It has 2 employees, a remote data clerk and a controller. With Arthur gone, the controller position for Piermont Services was also vacant. During the chaotic week of Arthur's departure, I drafted a memo. I proposed a solution to the dual authorization problem that would ensure payroll went out on time and the bank remained satisfied. I would continue as the interim signatory for straight-line logistics and vowed to ensure seamless operational continuity and prevent any delays. I would also assume the role of controller for Piermont Services. One problem, one solution, 2 roles, different hat, same head. I didn't hide it. I didn't bury it in fine print. I sent an email to my father and my brother. The subject line was, "Urgent. Signatory authority. Update for payroll continuity." I attached 2 PDFs, the updated signature card for the bank and the executed assumption of duties for the Piermont Services controller role. My father replied in 5 minutes with a single word, "Fine." Jesse took an hour. His reply was even shorter, a single letter sent from his phone. Why? They never opened the attachments. They saw the words payroll continuity in the subject line and thought I was just doing my job. cleaning up another mess so their direct deposits would continue to arrive on time. Their arrogance was my camouflage. Their willful ignorance was my key. From that day forward, every dollar that moved through straight-line logistics passed through a system I controlled. Not just controlled, but a system I had personally designed and coded years earlier. Every salary, every executive bonus, every T&E reimbursement, every vendor payment, every petty cash stipend, they all route through a series of digital approval queues. Think of it as a complex waterway, and I am the lockmaster. I can slow the flow. I can divert it. I can stop it entirely. I built in certain features, of course, for efficiency. One of them is a function the system logs as load balancing. If a large disbursement batch, like payroll for our 1,126 employees, is submitted, the system can automatically pause it for up to 60 minutes to prevent server strain. It's a common feature. It also means I can halt a payment for an hour without triggering a single automated alert. It gives me a window. If, for some reason, a batch stalls twice, if it gets paused and then fails a secondary verification check, the system automatically pings the compliance department for a manual review. That's another hat I wear. After Arthur quit, I'd pointed out that our official head of compliance was a redundant position, easily absorbed by the operations directorate. It was another cost-saving measure they'd enthusiastically approved. So, when the system flags a problem, it sends an email to an inbox that I, and only I, have the password to. But my finest work, my most elegant piece of code, is a single, deeply embedded rule I named Cedar. My mother loved the cedar trees that grew behind our first house. She said they were patient and strong, and they never lost their color, even in the harshest winter. I wrote the cedar rule late one night in my office, fueled by coffee and a quiet, simmering rage after Jesse had approved a 6-figure consulting payment to one of Bryn's friends. The rule is simple. If any payroll batch contains an anomaly in value greater than 3% compared to the previous cycle's verified batch, the system must halt. Not pause, halt. It freezes the entire disbursement, flags it as a potential high-level fraud attempt, and locks the executive payment queue until a full manual audit is completed. 3% is the magic number. It's small enough to ignore a few new hires or a couple of terminations. It's large enough to be invisible during the normal ebb and flow of business, but it is not large enough to overlook something significant. It is not large enough to overlook the sudden, undocumented removal of a 33-year-old director of operations, her 6-figure salary, her quarterly performance bonus, and her vested profit-sharing options from the executive payroll batch. As I sit here, watching my father pontificate about his new directions, I can feel the numbers clicking into place in my head. The restructure he just announced so proudly, the one that eliminated my role, has created a 17% anomaly in tomorrow's executive payroll file. Miles away, in a server room cooled to a steady 65 degrees, a silent alarm has just been tripped. A protocol I wrote in the memory of a good woman has just executed its primary function. It has identified a threat to the company's integrity, and it has stopped it cold. Cedar just woke up. The system is a machine. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't understand betrayal or birthdays. It only understands logic, rules, and data. And for the past 6 months, I have been feeding it data. Every transaction, every invoice, every expense report has been a single drop of water, slowly, patiently, filling a reservoir behind a dam of their own making. The Cedar rule was the trigger. What they don't know is that the floodgates were already prepared. The audit trail I've curated has teeth, and tonight, it's going to bite down to the bone. It begins with Marla, across the table. She is dabbing the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, talking about an upcoming charity gala. The irony is a physical weight in the air. For the last 18 months, Straight Line Logistics has been paying a vendor called Blue Rook Holdings a flat fee of $50,000 a month. The invoices are always vague. For ongoing strategic advisory services, there are never any deliverables, no reports, no meeting minutes, just a wire transfer on the 15th of every month. Blue Rook Holdings is a Delaware LLC, a public record search, which cost me $79 and took about 5 minutes. Shows its sole registered agent is a man named Richard Klein. Richard Klein is Marla's first cousin, a failed real estate agent from Tampa. The LLC was incorporated 2 days before its first invoice was submitted to Straight Line. This isn't a strategic partnership. It's a private pipeline, siphoning a neat $600,000 a year from my family's company into hers. Then there is Jesse. He catches my eye and gives me a look of what he probably thinks is pity. I think of his discretionary fund. It's meant for legitimate business development, taking clients to lunch, attending industry conferences. Jesse's interpretation is more creative. He labels the receipts from a Miami nightclub's bottle service as client acquisition. A weekend trip to a Napa vineyard with Bryn becomes a supplier relations retreat. The fund is a slush fund, a private bank account underwritten by company revenue. Last quarter, I calculated that his personal, non-business-related expenditures, all miscategorized and approved by himself, totaled just over $82,000. It's not just theft, it's the sheer, easy arrogance of it. He assumes no one is looking. He is wrong. I have been looking closely. Last quarter, while running a diagnostic on the new accounting software, I found 2 approvals that were impossible. They were for wire transfers from the discretionary fund to a personal account, both authorized with Jesse's credentials. The problem was the timestamps. The first approval was logged at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Jesse's own company-issued phone, according to GPS data, was at a Lakers game at the time. The second was authorized on a Saturday morning when his login records showed he was on a flight to Cabo. He had forged the digital approvals, likely by giving his password to someone in accounting to backdate them, a clumsy attempt to hide the transfers. I took screenshots of everything: the approval logs, the GPS data, the wire transfer receipts. I saved them in a triple encrypted, cloud-based folder. I named the folder Candles. I created it on my 30th birthday, a little present to myself for the future. These facts, these numbers, are inert on their own. They need a voice. Last year, in a fit of performative corporate responsibility after a competitor had an insider trading scandal, Marla insisted our board of directors establish a formal whistleblower program. For transparency, she'd said. The board agreed, tasking me, the director of operations, with contracting an independent third-party firm to manage the anonymous hotline and web portal. I did my research. I vetted 3 firms. The one I selected, a discreet DC-based agency called Argent Investigative Solutions, isn't just a call center. They are forensic accountants and former federal prosecutors. They specialize in turning anonymous tips into airtight cases for criminal prosecution. The board signed the contract without reading past the first page. They believe they have a suggestion box. I know they have a direct line to a team of bloodhounds, and I already paid their retainer. Tonight, while they were singing Happy Birthday, my thumb did more than just activate the quiet hours protocol. At exactly 7:14 p.m., the minute of my birth, a small, private piece of poetry in an evening of prose, a pre-scheduled email was sent from a secure, anonymous address to the Argent Investigative Solutions whistleblower portal. The subject was Routine Variance Review Request. The body of the email was simple, containing only 2 case numbers corresponding to the Blue Rook Holdings and Jesse Pierce discretionary fund accounts. It was an innocuous-looking request, but I wrote the protocol for these requests myself, in conjunction with Argent. Such a request, coming from a verified internal source, automatically triggers a Tier 1 investigation. And a Tier 1 investigation, according to the terms of service my father signed, begins with an immediate, non-negotiable freeze on all related financial accounts pending documentation. This includes executive bonuses. Their 7-figure annual bonuses, which were scheduled to be paid out next Friday, are now locked in a digital vault. To get them, they will have to provide documentation. They will have to explain the receipts. They will have to justify every last dollar. This is not revenge. Revenge is a messy, emotional act. This is a mathematical proof. It is an equation moving toward its inevitable conclusion. I don't need revenge. I need gravity. My father, my brother, my stepmother, they have been living in a world without consequences, floating on the lift of their own self-importance. Tonight, gravity gets paperwork, every invoice from Blue Rook, every forged approval, every receipt for champagne masquerading as a business expense is a weight I am now attaching to their ankles. I glance at the watch on my wrist. It's 10:00 p.m. In my calendar, for 10:00 a.m. tomorrow, is a single entry. Board briefing. The alert is already set. I have given them, and myself, a 12-hour countdown. 12 hours for the system freeze to take hold. 12 hours for Argent to open their files. 12 hours for the truth to gather mass. The clock is ticking. Each second is a footstep. Each minute is a closing door. They think the party is over. It has just begun. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cold North Alder night. The air was sharp and clean. A welcome shock after the cloying atmosphere of lies and cheap perfume. My family remained inside, laughing over the dregs of their wine, secure in their victory. They thought they had put out a fire. They had only thrown gasoline on an ember. By the time I reached my car, the plan was no longer a contingency. It was a sequence of commands waiting for execution. The first command was sent before I even started the engine. The 10:00 a.m. board briefing was originally scheduled for the 4th floor conference room, a soundproofed box of dark wood and leather where secrets were kept and careers were quietly ended, a place for a private hanging. I pulled up the calendar invitation on my phone. My fingers moved quickly, editing the location. The new venue was Warehouse 3, the main distribution hub. During the Friday all-hands town hall meeting, a public square, I added a note for the board members. Moving to this venue to facilitate a company-wide discussion on our shared commitment to transparency. Let them wonder what that meant. The second command was the agenda itself. I sent an updated meeting notice to the entire company, from the C-suite to the overnight cleaning crew. The subject line was a masterpiece of benign corporate jargon, designed to be both reassuring and non-negotiable. Mandatory all-hands meeting, a discussion on operational transparency and payroll continuity. The two phrases were a perfect pairing. Transparency implied openness. Payroll continuity implied a threat. It guaranteed everyone would be there, the worried, the curious, and the guilty. My third call was to a woman I'd never spoken to, but whose name I had kept in my private contacts for months. Her name was Diane Albright, and she was the Senior Vice President of the Corporate Fraud and Forensics Unit at Piermont Trust and Financial. I didn't call her direct line. I called the 24-hour security operations number and had them patch me through, a method that ensured the call was recorded and time-stamped on the bank's end. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice calm and professional. "This is Rowan Pierce, Director of Operations at Straight Line Logistics. We're holding a company-wide town hall tomorrow morning at 10:00 hours to discuss some best practices around financial security. Given our long-standing partnership with Piermont, I was hoping you or a senior member of your team might be available to join us as guest speakers. A 5-minute presentation on identifying and preventing internal fraud would be invaluable to my team." There was a pause. A fraud investigator doesn't usually get invited to give keynote speeches. She was intrigued. "That's an unusual request. Ms. Pierce, is there a specific concern?" "Only a proactive one," I lied smoothly. "We believe in reinforcing the highest ethical standards from the ground up. Your presence would send a powerful message." I knew that for a bank, the chance to publicly demonstrate their commitment to anti-fraud measures to a major client was too good to pass up. She promised a 2-person team would be there. They would be my silent, impartial witnesses in suits. Next, I dealt with HR. I called our director, a perpetually stressed woman named Linda. "Linda, it's Rowan. I need you to do something for me, quietly. There's a potential restructuring being announced tomorrow. I need severance packages drawn up for 12 employees. I'll send you the list." The list I sent her contained the names of 12 mid-level managers, all solid performers. all people who would be shocked to hear they were on a chopping block. I told her to have the packets ready in sealed envelopes by 9 a.m. It was a cruel but necessary piece of misdirection. The news would leak from her department within an hour. The rumor would spread like wildfire through the company that there were going to be layoffs. It would create a current of anxiety, ensuring every single employee was glued to the proceedings. But it would point their fear in the wrong direction. By the time I arrived at the deserted Straight Line headquarters, it was almost midnight. The executive wing was dark and silent. I went to the AV department first. I found the lead technician's cell phone number and woke him up. I apologized, blamed a last-minute directive from my father, and gave him his instructions. He was to set up the large mobile stage in the center of the warehouse 3 floor, with a podium, a sound system, and the main projector screen. And one more thing. Carlos, I said, I need a split-screen feed. On the left, a live camera on the podium. On the right, a direct input from a laptop that I will provide. It's critical that both are crystal clear. He grumbled, but he agreed. Then, I went to my office. The camera above my desk stared at me, its small green light glowing. I ignored it. I logged into the primary accounting server, not as the director of ops, but as the controller of Piermont Services, using the credentials they had never bothered to question. I bypassed the standard user interface and went directly into the back-end archives. For the next 2 hours, I printed copies of the signature authorization cards from the past 6 months, showing every wire transfer and check batch approval. Caleb Pierce's looping, arrogant signature, Jesse Pierce's impatient, sloppy scrawl, and on the counter-signature line of every single one, R, Pierce, my signature, neat, precise, and final. Once the physical evidence was stacked neatly on my desk, I returned to the digital realm. I accessed the payroll system and canceled the executive batch that the Cedar Rule had already frozen. Then I created a new one, a second batch. This one contained payments for 1,126 employees. I went through the list of names one by one, a silent roll call of the people who actually moved the world for this company. The forklift drivers, the dispatchers, the data entry clerks, the janitors. When I was done, I authorized the batch. The system asked for dual authorization. I approved it as R, Pierce for Straight Line. Then I approved it again as R, Pierce for Piermont Services. The system accepted it without a whisper. I routed the confirmation stubs to the high-speed printer in HR, with instructions for them to be placed in sealed, unmarked blue envelopes, not the standard beige ones, a different color, a sign that this Friday was different. My final act was to email Evelyn Reed, the chair of the board. She was a no-nonsense retired judge who valued brevity and facts above all else. My email was 4 lines long. Evelyn. A significant financial anomaly was uncovered this evening, forcing an automatic freeze on the executive payroll disbursement. Evidence suggests multiple instances of potential wire fraud and embezzlement originating from within the executive team. Tomorrow's 10 a.m. Town Hall will serve as the official board briefing. Key evidence is attached. Rowan. The 3 attachments were simple PDFs. Exhibit A, a summary of the invoices and payment history for Blue Rook Holdings. Exhibit B, the screenshots from the folder named Candles. Exhibit C, a copy of the dual authorization agreement with Piermont Trust and Financial, clearly highlighting my name as the final signatory. I hit send. It was 4:13 a.m. I walked to the small sofa in my office, the one I'd slept on 1,000 times before during supply chain crises and winter storms. I didn't bother to take off my shoes. I set my phone alarm for 5 o'clock. As I closed my eyes, I didn't dream of my family's faces or the fallout to come. I dreamed of the steady, rhythmic beeping of forklifts in reverse, a sound that had been the soundtrack to my entire life. It sounded like a metronome, counting down the final hours. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., Graybridge. The cavernous space of Warehouse 3 was filled with the low hum of nervous energy. The air smelled of concrete dust, cardboard, and lukewarm coffee. On the vast floor, between towering racks of palletized inventory, stood the entire company. It was a stark visual divide. On one side, the warehouse crew, a sea of high-visibility orange and yellow safety vests, their faces weathered and skeptical. On the other, the office staff, huddled together in their corporate blues and grays, looking pale and out of place under the harsh sodium lamps. They were two separate tribes, forced into a single, anxious congregation. On the hastily erected stage, my father, Marla, and Jessie stood near the podium, attempting to look regal. I stood a few feet away, next to two quiet, impeccably dressed strangers, Diane Albright and a junior associate from Piermont's fraud unit. My father stepped to the microphone, tapping it twice in a gesture of paternalistic command. He surveyed the crowd, his gaze sweeping over them as if he were a king reviewing his subjects. He smiled, a wide, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the massive space. "I know there are a lot of rumors flying around, so I wanted to bring us all together, because at the end of the day, Straight Line isn't just a company, we're a family." From the back row of the glowing vests, a single, sharp sound cut through his words. It wasn't quite a cough, and it wasn't quite a laugh. It was a dry, percussive bark of pure cynicism. A ripple of grim smiles spread through the warehouse crew. They knew what kind of family this was. The kind where the parents eat steak and the children get scraps. My father's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The script was already failing him. Before he could recover, I moved. I walked to the second microphone, my heels clicking sharply on the metal stage. I didn't look at him. I looked at the hundreds of faces staring up at me. "We are a company," I said, my voice clear and cold, amplified to fill every corner of the warehouse. "Families don't do payroll." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the expected narrative. I saw Jessie tense, and Marla's painted-on smile tighten. I didn't give them time to react. I gestured to the woman beside me. "To that end, I've invited a guest to speak to us today about the importance of financial integrity. This is Diane Albright, Senior Vice President of Corporate Fraud at our banking partner, Piermont Trust." Diane stepped forward. She was a woman in her late 50s with graying hair and an aura of absolute, unshakable competence. She didn't need to raise her voice. The microphone did the work for her. "Good morning. My team was invited here to observe. However, in light of information received in the past 12 hours, we have opened a formal review into what our initial analysis can only describe as irregularities in the executive disbursement protocols at this company." The word landed like a dropped wrench. Irregularities. It was a banker's word, devoid of emotion, but it was heavier than any accusation. You could feel the air shift, the anxiety in the room sharpening, focusing. My father's face went rigid. "Now, what is that supposed to mean?" he blustered, turning toward me. I ignored him. "Carlos, bring up Exhibit B. Please," I said into the mic, my voice even. On the giant split screen behind us, the left side remained a live feed of the stage. On the right, an image flickered into existence, a screenshot of a wire transfer approval. The crowd collectively leaned in to see. "What you're seeing," I explained, my voice narrating the evidence, "is a wire transfer for $50,000, approved on a Saturday morning last April, from Jesse Pierce's discretionary fund. The recipient is a private account." I clicked a button on the laptop at the podium. A new image appeared next to the first, the system's login data. According to our own records, this approval was made using Jesse's credentials. However, click, a third document appeared, an airline e-ticket. Jesse was on flight 2814 to Cabo San Lucas at the precise moment this transfer was approved. Jesse lunged toward the microphone. That's an obvious clerical error. My password was compromised." "Was it compromised 2 months later as well?" I asked, my tone flat. Click. A new set of documents appeared, another transfer approval, this one for $32,000, time-stamped at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Next to it, GPS data from Jesse's company phone. "Because at this exact time, you appear to have been enjoying a basketball game, or perhaps," I added, letting a beat of silence hang in the air. "You were at church, as you claimed on your time card for that week." A wave of quiet, vicious laughter rolled through the warehouse crew. Jesse's face, projected 20 feet high, was a mask of crimson fury and panic. For the first time, Marla looked genuinely afraid. She reached out, her manicured fingers brushing my father's sleeve. He didn't take her hand. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were glued to the screen, to the undeniable, black and white proof of his son's stupidity and theft. The united front was broken. "These isolated incidents are concerning," I continued, "but they are merely symptoms of a deeper problem, a problem of oversight." I cleared the screen. "Carlos, run the signature sequence, please." And then they appeared, one after another, in a rapid, damning succession. Images of checks, wire authorizations, bonus disbursement forms. For 6 solid months, every single one had 2 signatures. The first was either Caleb's or Jesse's. The second, on the required counter-signature line, was mine. Every Friday, every payroll batch, every executive payout. The screen was a blur of their looping, sloppy handwriting, and my own neat, consistent script. R. Pierce, R. Pierce, R. Pierce. A collective gasp sucked the air from the warehouse. It was followed by a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. Every person in that building, from the VPs in the front row to the packers in the back, was doing the same mental calculation. They finally understood. They understood the emails they'd sent me, the problems I'd solved, the signature they had always needed but never truly seen. They understood who held the pen. In that perfect, heavy silence, I turned my head slightly and gave a single, sharp nod to Linda, the HR director, who was standing at the edge of the crowd with her team. She nodded back, on cue. She and her staff moved into the aisles, carrying stacks of sealed blue envelopes. They began to pass them out, moving quickly through the rows of stunned employees. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, a forklift driver in the third row, a big man with a thick beard, ripped his envelope open. He pulled out his pay stub, looked at it, and then looked back up at the stage, directly at me. He started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound in the silent warehouse. Then a woman from accounting opened hers, and she began to clap. Then another, and another. It started as a scattered, hesitant patter, but as the blue envelope spread and the truth dawned, the sound grew. It swelled from the front rows to the back, from the office staff to the warehouse crew, until the entire building was filled with a single, deafening, unanimous wave of applause. It wasn't for me. It was for the beautiful, simple clarity of payday. It was the sound of gravity, finally taking hold. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over the stage, pressing my family back on their heels. For a full minute, it was the only thing in the universe. It was the sound of 1,000 people realizing the truth all at once. But in the heart of that storm, my brother Jesse found one last surge of desperate, foolish rage. He lunged for my father's microphone, shoving him aside. The sound of feedback shrieked through the warehouse as he grabbed it, silencing the clapping. His face, magnified on the screen, was blotchy and slick with sweat. His eyes were wild. "Lies," he screamed, his voice cracking. "She's manipulating all of you. It's a conflict of interest. She controlled the whole system, and she used it to trick you, to frame us, while she was paying herself." He fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it up, shaking it like a battle flag. It was a printout of an email. "I found this, last night. She got sloppy," he yelled, turning to the crowd, trying to win them back. "This is an email, dated yesterday, authorizing an emergency bonus payment. A bonus for $100,000, paid out to Rowan P. See? She was lining her own pockets while she plotted against us." The warehouse fell silent again, but this time it was a different silence. It was filled with confusion, with the flicker of doubt. Jesse saw his opening and pressed, his voice dripping with venom. "She's the criminal. She's the one who should be investigated. He thought it was a masterstroke. He thought he'd found a crack in my plan. He hadn't. He'd just walked directly into the center of the real trap. I remained perfectly still. I let his accusation hang in the air, letting the weight of it settle. Then, I turned to Diane Albright. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the tension. "It seems my brother has produced a new piece of evidence. Could we have Carlos project that document onto the screen, please?" A junior staffer ran to the stage and took the crumpled paper from Jesse's hand, placing it under the document camera. The email appeared on the right side of the screen. It was exactly as Jesse had described. An authorization, sent from a generic accounting email address, for a bonus to Rowan P., dated the previous evening. It looked damning. I didn't deny it. I didn't defend myself. I simply looked at the banker. "Ms. Albright, your team has access to the source code of any email that moves through a corporate server, correct? Including the metadata footer that isn't visible on a standard printout?" Diane nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "That's correct." "Could you please isolate that footer for us?" I asked. "Specifically, I'm interested in the origination IP address and the network identifier." Jesse's face contorted. "What? That's just technical nonsense to confuse you." But Diane was already speaking quietly to her associate, who was typing rapidly on a laptop. A few seconds later, a new image overlaid the email on the screen. A string of text, a block of code. Diane pointed a pen at a specific line. "The email originated from a secured Wi-Fi network," she announced, her voice devoid of emotion. "The network's registered name is Blue Rook Holdings." A single, sharp gasp came from the stage. It was Marla. The blood drained from her face. The connection had been made. The fake email meant to frame me had been sent from her cousin's shell company. Jesse hadn't found an email. He had taken the bait I'd left for him, a draft I had intentionally saved in a shared folder he was known to spy on, and in his panic, he had sent it from the first private off-site network he could think of. His accomplice had just become his undoing. But I wasn't finished. "And the bonus itself, Ms. Albright," I continued, my voice like ice. "While you have the file open, could you trace the destination account for that $100,000 transfer? The one for Rowan P.?" More typing. The silence in the warehouse was now absolute. Everyone was holding their breath. "The transfer was routed to a personal checking account at a subsidiary of our bank," Diane confirmed. "The account number ends in 7109. I turned my head and looked directly at my brother for the first time. 7109, I said, letting the numbers settle in the air. "Wasn't that your number? On the college football team? The one you still have on your license plate?" It was a gut punch. Jesse stumbled back as if I had physically struck him. He had tried to frame me, but he'd sent the money to his own account, using a number tied to his own vanity as a pathetic attempt at a password. It was the sloppy, arrogant work of a man who had never once believed he could get caught. And then, the final piece fell into place. Diane Albright's associate, the quiet man who had been typing all along, stood up. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a long, legal-sized envelope. He unfurled it not with a flick, but with the slow, deliberate grace of a magician revealing his final trick. "Caleb and Jesse Pierce," he said, his voice ringing with sudden, chilling authority. "This is a warrant, issued by the District Attorney's Office in conjunction with the federal banking authorities. We are freezing all personal and corporate assets related to this investigation, pending a full forensic audit." The world seemed to stop. The warrant was real. This wasn't a company meeting anymore. It was a crime scene. For the first time all morning, Marla spoke. Her voice was a ragged whisper, a desperate plea. "Caleb," she said, grabbing his arm, this time with force. "Caleb, say something." But my father said nothing. He wasn't looking at his wife or his son. He was looking at the giant screen, which Carlos, in a stroke of genius, had switched back to the rolling display of my signature, page after page of my neat, precise, correct signature, the signature that had kept his company running, while all this rot was festering beneath the surface. He blinked, hard, as if trying to wake himself from a long and terrible dream. He looked old. Suddenly, a new face appeared on the left side of the screen, patching in via a video call. It was Evelyn Reed, the chair of the board, her expression as stern and unforgiving as a courtroom sketch. Her voice was remote, crisp, and precise. In light of the evidence presented here today, and the presence of federal investigators, I am exercising my authority as chair to call for an emergency vote of the board, effective immediately. She didn't need to specify the motion. Everyone knew. All in favor, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. On the screen, I saw her own hand go up. Then, one by one, the video feeds from the other 4 remote board members blinked on, each showing a single, raised hand. The vote is unanimous, Evelyn declared, her voice like a gavel. And it is immediate. Evelyn Reed's face on the screen was impassive, a study in judicial neutrality. The unanimous vote of the board was not a recommendation. It was a verdict. Her voice, amplified through the warehouse speakers, was stripped of all emotion, leaving only the hard, unyielding structure of legal and corporate authority. Each sentence was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the House of Pierce. Effective immediately, she began, her gaze fixed on the camera as if she were looking each of us in the eye simultaneously. Caleb Pierce is suspended from his duties as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Straightline Logistics, pending the results of a full, independent forensic investigation. My father flinched. The word suspended was an insult he had never imagined could be applied to him. It wasn't a firing. It was a quarantine. It meant he was being treated as a contagion, a threat to the health of the organization he had built. He opened his mouth to protest, but Evelyn was already moving on, her pace relentless. Jesse Pierce, she continued, her voice dropping a fraction of a degree colder, is terminated for cause, effective immediately, the cause being gross misuse of company funds, fraudulent authorization of transactions, and actions deliberately intended to cause financial and reputational harm to this corporation. As she spoke the words terminated for cause, Jesse's company-issued phone, which he was clutching in his hand, went dark. A small icon flashed on the screen for a moment, a red circle with a line through it, and then it was just a black, dead rectangle. On the main screen, a system notification, visible to all 1,000 employees, popped up in a small, discrete window. User J. Pierce. Access revoked. All systems. He was digitally erased mid-sentence. The speed of it was brutal, a clean technological beheading. Evelyn's attention shifted, though her expression did not. Marla Pierce is hereby removed from any and all vendor approval and consulting oversight committees. Her access to company financial systems is revoked. The vendor known as Blue Rook Holdings is to be flagged for immediate legal review for the purposes of financial clawback of all monies paid. Marla made a small, strangled sound. The pipeline was cut. The secret, steady flow of cash that funded her galas, her diamonds, her entire carefully curated existence, was gone. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with panic, but he was staring into the middle distance, lost in his own ruin. The board chair then addressed the entire room. The Piermont Trust and Financial Investigation will proceed. All non-essential executive disbursements, bonuses, and discretionary funds are frozen, effective immediately. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in for the people on the stage. Then she delivered the counterpoint. The general employee payroll batch for this pay period, as authorized by the acting controller, has been verified by the bank and will proceed without interruption. Your checks are secure. A wave of palpable relief rolled through the crowd. It wasn't applause this time. It was 1,000 small, private exhales, the fear of the rumored layoffs, the anxiety of the morning, all of it dissolved in that single, crucial promise. Their work was honored. Their pay was safe. Furthermore, Evelyn's voice cut back in, sharp as glass. The Pierce Family Trust will be placed under immediate protective oversight by the courts, as stipulated in the trust's own bylaws regarding criminal investigation of its primary beneficiaries. There will be no distributions to any party currently under review until this matter is fully resolved. That was the final blow. The job, the company, the slush funds were gone. Now, the generational wealth that insulated them from all consequences was locked away. They were, for the first time in their lives, financially vulnerable. They were cut off. There was one last piece of business. To ensure operational stability during this transitional period, Evelyn announced, the board has voted to appoint an acting chief executive officer. This individual will have the full and unrestricted authority of the board to manage company operations until the external audit concludes. That appointment is Rowan Pierce. Every head in the warehouse swiveled to look at me. A microphone was offered in my direction. I held up a hand and shook my head, declining it. I didn't need a speech. The work was the only statement that mattered. I looked up at Evelyn's image on the screen and gave a single, sharp nod of acceptance. The authority was a weight I had been carrying for years without the title. Now, they were simply making it official. The spell was broken. 2 uniformed security guards, men I knew from the night shift, walked onto the stage. They moved with a quiet, apologetic professionalism. They walked to Jesse. "Sir, we need to escort you from the premises." Jesse looked at them, then at my father, his face a mess of disbelief and fury. "Dad, do something!" But Dad didn't move. He couldn't. He had no authority left. As the guards gently but firmly took Jesse by the arm, his personal phone, the one Bryn had bought him, began to buzz incessantly in his pocket. A text notification flashed on its screen, visible for a moment before he was turned away. "Bryn, where are you?" "Bryn, the board is calling me." "Bryn, Jesse, answer me." He was being led away from his life, and his wife, the family archivist, had missed the final, most important scene. As they guided a sputtering, defeated Jesse off the stage and toward a side exit, a voice called out from the back of the warehouse. It wasn't a shout. It was raw and clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Thank you." It was the forklift driver, the one who had started the applause. He was standing with his hard hat in his hands. His face was etched with decades of long shifts and little recognition. The words didn't sound triumphant. They sounded like a prayer that had been denied for so long he'd forgotten how to ask. A prayer that had, against all odds, just been heard. And in that moment, as the doors closed behind my brother and the low hum of the warehouse lights seemed to settle into a new, calmer rhythm, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 24 hours. It was a slow, quiet exhale, carrying with it the weight of 33 years of silence, the smoke from 1,000 tiny cuts, and the final, satisfying click of a lock falling perfectly into place. The warehouse was quiet now. The sharp echo of Evelyn Reed's verdict had faded, leaving behind a thick, expectant silence. The board members' faces had vanished from the screen, and my family, what was left of them on the stage, seemed frozen, like figures in a photograph of a forgotten disaster. The anger and shock had burned away, leaving behind the gray ash of consequence. I did not give a victory speech. I did not make a single proclamation. Instead, I walked to the edge of the stage, where Linda from HR was waiting beside a simple folding table and a chair, which 2 warehouse workers had just set up. On the table was a stack of the unsigned pay stubs, the blue envelopes, and a single, heavy fountain pen. This was my new desk. This was my first act as CEO. The spotlight that had been on the podium followed me, narrowing until it was a focused beam on the table, illuminating my hands as I sat. The rest of the stage fell into shadow. I picked up the first pay stub from the stack. The name on it was Hector Martinez. He's one of the janitors on the night crew, a man in his 60s with kind eyes who has worked for this company for 20 years. His salary is the lowest on the payroll. I uncapped the pen. The nib was cool against the paper. With a steady hand, I signed my name on the authorization line. R. Pierce, the ink, a dark, permanent black, settled into the fibers of the paper. It didn't look like a signature. It felt like an oath. I placed his stub in a blue envelope and set it aside. I picked up the next one, and the next. I signed for the entire forklift crew, men and women whose names I knew from reviewing loading manifests at 3 a.m. I signed for the night packers, the invisible army that keeps this company moving while the city sleeps. I signed for Maria, the dispatcher who brings her young son to the break room after school some days to finish his homework. A small, unspoken rule I always made a point to ignore. With every signature, I felt the weight in the room shift. This was not a performance. It was a transaction. It was the simple, profound act of paying people for their work. From a corner of the warehouse, a sound began. It was the steady, rhythmic hum of a high-speed printer. Linda had started printing the physical checks for the employees who weren't on direct deposit. The sound was not intrusive. It was a hymn, a steady, mechanical promise of order restored, of a system working as it should. It was the sound of the company's heart, beating once more. I worked through the stacks methodically, my signature becoming a smooth, practiced motion. Hundreds of names, hundreds of lives, each one a small, vital part of the whole. Finally, the stacks were gone. The table was covered in neat piles of sealed blue envelopes, all except for 2. They lay by themselves, stark against the dark wood of the table. One was addressed to Caleb Pierce, the other to Jesse Pierce. They remained blank, unsigned. A shadow fell over the table. My father had stepped forward. He stood before me, no longer the titan of industry, no longer the CEO. The anger was gone, the bluster stripped away. He just looked like a man who had lost his way. The harsh stage lighting carved deep lines into his face. "Rowan," he said. It was my name, but for the first time in my life, it was not a command. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a disappointment. It was just a name. A quiet statement of fact from a man who no longer knew what else to say. I did not answer him. I reached for a different envelope, a plain white one I had placed on the chair beside me. I stood and handed it to him. His hand trembled slightly as he took it. He pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was the board's official notice of his suspension. Tucked behind it was a second, smaller piece of paper, a photocopied excerpt from the Straight Line Logistics corporate bylaws. Ratified 15 years ago. It was Article 4, Section 2, the Code of Conduct Clause, the clause that stipulated immediate suspension for any executive officer whose actions result in a formal criminal or financial investigation, the clause he had written himself. He stared at the words he had authored, the trap he had built and then forgotten. In that moment, I thought of all the nights he had sat at the dining room table with me when I was a teenager, spreading out contracts and teaching me to read the fine print, to look for the loopholes, the liabilities, the language that held the real power. He taught me how to read contracts. I learned how to write endings. I turned from him and walked the few steps to the microphone. My voice, when I spoke, was even. It carried no trace of triumph, only a quiet finality. "Happy Friday, Straight Line," I said. "Your checks are safe." And then, a sound. The entire room, all 1,000 people, rose to their feet, but the applause was not the wild, angry roar from before. It was heavy. It was the sound of 1,000 immense weights being set down at once. It was the sound of respect, not for a victory, but for a promise kept. It was the sound of a ship righting itself in a storm. I walked back to the table. The spotlight was still on my hands. I looked down at the pen, still uncapped, resting beside the blank envelopes of the men who shared my last name. It was a simple fountain pen, black with a silver clip, heavy in the hand. It was the same one he had given me for my 12th birthday, the day he first took me to the warehouse and told me that one day this would all be mine. He was right, in the end. I put the cap on the pen. The soft click was the loudest sound in the world. And then, I put the pen down. I left the stage. The applause had died down, replaced by the low murmur of 1,000 separate conversations, the rustle of people opening their pay envelopes, The sea of employees parted for me as I walked, their faces a mixture of relief, curiosity, and a new, unfamiliar respect. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. My destination was the executive wing, a journey I had to make one last time. The path took me past the long glass wall of the main conference room, the one with the family photos. I caught my reflection in the polished surface. For a moment, I saw a stranger, her expression calm and unreadable, her posture straight. Then I realized, with a startling clarity that felt like a physical impact, that I was finally recognizing myself. I didn't enter the executive wing. Instead, I pushed open the heavy steel door that led out onto the main loading dock. The cool morning air hit me. A line of trucks waited, their engines idling, ready for the day's first shipments. As I stood there, one of the massive bay doors began to rise with a hydraulic hiss, a great metal curtain opening onto the world outside. It felt like the beginning of something. My phone, which had been silent in my pocket, began to buzz, a relentless, frantic vibration. I pulled it out. The screen was a cascade of notifications. Missed calls from Bryn, dozens of them, a string of panicked, incoherent texts from Marla, a single, ominous message from my father's lawyer. "Call me immediately." I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching the messages pile up like digital debris. Then, I silenced the phone and put it back in my pocket without opening a single one. Their world was imploding, but it was no longer my problem to solve. I turned and walked back inside, my purpose clear. In the main office area, I found what I was looking for, a small, industrial shredder next to a recycling bin. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the thin cream-colored envelope from the night before. I took out the check, the one for $0, and the little note that said, "Grow up." I fed them both into the machine's hungry slot. The motor whirred, and in a shower of confetti-like strips, the final insult of my old life was irrevocably destroyed. As I turned from the shredder, Diane Albright and her associate were approaching me. She had a small, professional smile on her face. "Congratulations, Ms. Pierce," she said, extending her hand. "That was efficient." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm. "We have work to do, Ms. Albright," I replied, my voice even. "A lot of accounts to clean up." "Indeed," she said. "My team will be in touch to coordinate the audit. We'll be as unobtrusive as possible." "Be as obtrusive as you need to be," I corrected her. "Transparency starts now." My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered it. It was Evelyn Reed. "Rowan," she said, her voice crisp. "The press is going to get wind of this within the hour. They'll need a quote, a statement from the acting CEO." I thought for a moment, looking out over the warehouse floor, at the steady, rhythmic movement of people and machines. "I have 5 words for you. Evelyn," I said. "I'm listening." "Pay people first, then talk." I heard her exhale, a sound that might have been a chuckle. "That'll do just fine, Rowan. That'll do just fine." She hung up. I returned the pen, my father's pen, to my inside jacket pocket. It settled against my chest, a small, familiar weight that felt, for the first time, exactly right. It was not a gift anymore. It was a tool, and I knew how to use it. Across the vast floor, I saw the 2 security guards from the stage emerge from the corridor leading to the executive offices. One of them held up a key, then turned the lock on the main glass doors. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was inaudible from this distance, but I felt it. The hum of the central air conditioning in that wing would be the only sound there now. Outside, on the main floor, the familiar, powerful hum of the forklifts was already rising to take its place. It was the sound of work, the sound of the company, alive and breathing. I turned and walked toward the main entrance, away from the stage, away from the offices, away from the ghosts. I did not look at my father or Marla, who were now being quietly spoken to by the banking investigators. I did not look back. The scene cuts, holding on a final, still image, the folding table on the stage. On it, a single, tall stack of the sealed blue envelopes, ready for distribution. The light catches the top one, and through the small plastic window, a signature is visible. It is neat, precise, and perfectly straight, a clean horizon, stretching out as far as the eye can see. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So drop a comment below with your city or country, and let's connect. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it and want to see more content like this, hit that hype button to help this story get heard by more people. Your support means the world.